Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is October 5, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Martin B. Penkala. Is that the correct way to mispronunciate it,
You
Martin?
got it, Jerry. Yes.
Where in the heck you calling in from?
Buffalo, New York, but more specifically East Aurora, which is about 20 miles outside Buffalo.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
I'd say peace of mind.
Wow, that is a great thing to say. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
In terms of media variety, I'd have to still say the good old fashioned tome, the book. I like the heft of it, I like the palpability of it, and I love to scan the printed word.
Love it. Did you grow up, just to divert, did you grow up nurturing this love of reading? One, because your parents did it as an example. Two, they told you to read, or on your own?
On my own.
Wow.
Yes.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think for a variety of reasons, the most primal of all would be information to better their life. You could put that under survival, I suppose. Um, then from there on in, to be able to function properly in the world, which is a real broad generalization. That includes everything from your everyday life to your job, I suppose, your career. And then I think on the upper echelon, to satiate curiosity, period.
You covered the raw waterfront there, dude. That's great words. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I'm going to say innate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Do,
we're wired to gather data. And I think that what's new, and of course, McLuhan addressed this profoundly, is the variety of manners in which we can now collect information. But
yep.
for tens of thousands of years, we had only verbal communication. Then along came our inscription, our ability to write, and that pretty much was it until a few hundred years ago. Yeah.
Dude, you got it covered. It's three types: spoken word, printed word, and electronic word.
Yep, that's the new
And
one.
people say that I left out gesture. Well, gesture is sort of spoken word. It's
Sure.
similar to that.
It's
So
very
it's
similar.
sort of
Yeah.
included in there. Do thoughts create emotions?
No.
Way
I
to
think.
go. Everybody says yes. Now, why are you saying no? Thank God someone's thinking here.
Yeah. I think emotions arise uh, almost precognitively. I think that they well up and they may be associated with thoughts, and thoughts sort of are their crystallization. But I think a raw emotion like fear, your mind can be a blank slate and you can experience fear.
Shh, you are smart. How'd you get that? Because why do 99% of people, when I ask, do thoughts create emotions, they go, well, they can. And yes. Why did you? Because you have some sort of background in deeper how the brain works. Why would you say no?
I was suspicious when I was in college as an undergraduate, absorbing a lot of modern critical theory, particularly from the French schools of Barthes and Derrida, Julia Kristeva, etc. And I noticed a tremendous bias in them, that they were convinced that um, uh, language creates thought, or that you cannot be thinking in any manner whatsoever without language in your mind forming in some fashion. And this was suspect to me all the time, because my early curiosities were about scientists. And as any good scientist can tell you, particularly mathematicians and people who are into topology, a branch of mathematics, and even Einstein could have said this, there is a visualization process which is considered thinking for these people. Scientists think in pictures. We all think in pictures. So there is a cognition that happens that is non-verbal, that is it's imagistic. It's not based on any kind of linguistic structure that I can discern. So that's mainly my view.
That is beautiful. You really articulated that well, Martin. I really felt I understood that. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
It's innate.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
Well, I know a popular answer, and there's some truth to it, is I don't know what I think until I write it down.
That's Joan
Um,
Didion. Joan Didion said that.
yes, and so did Stephen King, and I think the creative writer John Gardner, who used to teach at Bennington. Um, yeah, there's a way of looking at it that you cannot fully articulate your thought in a subtle way, I suppose, unless you inscribe it in typographical characters. But again, when I think of Newton or Einstein, when Newton was formulating the universal theory of gravitation, I wonder how much of that was actually verbal. He was able to make associations and connections, then translate them into mathematical formula, probably bypassing verbal structures.
So your answer is until I write it down. Is that what
For
I'm saying?
me, for me personally, yes.
Yeah.
But I think others are capable of fully formed, articulated thought uh, without having to inscribe it.
Yeah. Because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion, Stephen King, and John Gardner say, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Right.
Beautiful. Can humans think without language?
Yes. Absolutely. That's that division that I had a problem with. Is I think it goes back to Piaget or further, where there's this notion that all thought is language based, and I think that these are people who simply have never talked to a scientist. Ask a chemist or a physicist if all their best thoughts came to them in words. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Wow. Chomsky says a language is not just words, it's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Martin, what do you do when language breaks down? When language doesn't work? What do you do?
If you mean in a sort of socio-political sense at large,
Well, that's a great question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer, but I will. In a socio-political sense, you put the questions into the context you want. So if you want to put it in that context, that's fine. If you want to put it in a different context, that's fine. Yeah. It's basically, yeah, when communication, well, I don't say when language breaks down, what do you do? That's the question.
yeah. And I'd say that to try to find um, another way, another means of expression that would be as rich in information as language is very difficult. I mean, a substitute for that would be, as you mentioned earlier, gesture only takes you so far and really is a kind of form of language in itself. I agree. So when language breaks down, you have a real problem. Um, if you consider mathematics a language, that's often the cliche. I disagree with that statement. I agree with the physicist Richard Feynman. He said mathematics is not just a language. He said it's a special form of symbolic expression that is like language plus reasoning. Because, as he said, you can create sentence, and Chomsky did this too with his famous colorless green ideas sleep furiously. He said you could create sentences that are virtually content free. In mathematics, a meaningful expression has to have meaningful value. And so Mathematics is a special case. I would not say that it's like learning Spanish or learning German. It's a special expression of concepts in a very compact way.
Wow. This line you said, there was a lot in there. I need to study this, Martin. You said there was a line, you said, create sentences that are content free.
Right.
So I learned early on studying Finnegan's Wake for over 25 years. I learned from one of my teachers, there's no content in Finnegan's Wake. And most people, most people get pissed and go, there is too. And, and so what was these 4 words? Create a sentence that's content free.
Yeah, that was Chomsky when he gave that example. And he gave the example of the sentence colorless green ideas sleep furiously. What you have there is it starts out with a contradiction or paradox, colorless green. Well, if it's green, it can't be colorless. If it's colorless, it can't be green. Ideas, well, what color is an idea? Sleep furiously. Another contradiction. If you're sleeping, you're not furious. If you're furious, you're not sleeping. So he just created whimsically this sentence full of self-contradiction, where at the end of it, you have not generated a idea or concept that's digestible because it's full of contradiction.
Well, dude, I learned from Frank Zappa, you need to embrace contradiction.
Yes, you do.
To me, Chomsky's got a sentence that's got a ton of, if you're Finneganese, there's a ton of content in that. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. That sounds like Finneganese.
It does a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah.
So anyways, I got to take this up with Mr. Chomsky. That was pretty cool. Okay, so your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings? I know it's both and it depends.
I'd say we're more feeling beings on
Yeah.
a daily basis of engagement with our environment, engagement with media. We feel our way more than think through what we're doing at each juncture.
Yeah. 2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, being a non-believer myself and a card-carrying mechanist, I don't have any evidence for something called a soul, so I would have to reply in the negative. No, it is not.
How do you spell mechanist?
Mechanist.
And it means what?
That you believe that everything is basically made of atoms.
Oh, belief in atoms. Good. The second question by Turing, can machines think?
That question I've been studying on my own through the works of Douglas Hofstadter from his famous book Gödel, Escher, Bach onwards. Artificial intelligence fascinates me. I also read Marvin Minsky's Society of Mind many years ago when that came out. And I would have to concur with Minsky and Hofstadter that in the sense that most people use it in the prosaic, mundane, everyday sense of the word, no, machines cannot think. Can we eventually create one that does? Probably, but
Okay.
but not at this time.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Meaning.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
I think we're creating it.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
The speed of light.
Poet Audre Lorde said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
That one you've got me with. I cannot think of
Well,
one offhand.
drop the word new. What tool do you gravitate towards?
In terms of exploring consciousness?
And again, if I open a question up with a cute quote, you don't even have to apply it. It's basically
Right.
you can go anywhere with it. Yeah, and again, you're putting it into the context you want. What tool do you? Yeah,
In that case, I'd have to say just curiosity.
yeah,
Curiosity is my tool.
yeah. That's good. What new toy do you suggest?
Ah, an air car.
Nice. You're saying you've ridden in one, or you're looking forward to having one?
Looking forward to actually driving one before I pass away, yes. Or if I
Wow.
should say flying one.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I worry about many things. They change. I'd say getting up in the morning and being alive is my first
Yeah.
priority. Yeah.
Louis Buñuel said, "Long live the living." McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound
Yeah.
that artists are the antenna of the race.
Yes.
And by artists, I mean poets, painters, filmmakers,
Yep.
musicians. The artists broadcast and detect the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions.
Yep. I'm familiar with that quote, and I completely agree with Ezra Pound.
Yeah. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think because we're supreme at rationalizing. You know, Jerry, I think we have agendas and they're not usually consciously articulated to ourselves, but we have them regardless. And damn it, we're going to pursue those agendas thoughtlessly if we have to, and with great disregard for more broader concerns. So I think, we're faulty creatures in that sense.
That's really evokes Marshall's. I may be wrong, but I'm never in doubt.
Yes.
Do artists have moral obligation?
My answer has changed on that over the years. When I was younger, I felt yes, but I now feel no. I feel that artists have essentially a compulsion, a good compulsion, to generate, to create, whatever that may be, from the most minute things to the greatest. And that unswerving propulsion to express and to make something, to put it as broadly as possible, make something, should not in any way kowtow to ideological or moral or ethical requirements of any culture anywhere. So I'm very much an art for art's sake person. And I also, of course, as a subset of that, I'm naturally completely anti censorship. I believe in free expression on the part of the artist because I do believe they are the antenna of the race. And I
Yeah.
think that an artist has something special to say and should have the permission to say that just granted, period.
Agreed. Thank you so much. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
That's a good one. I would have to say, when I look at it socio-politically, I'm more afraid of old ideas coming back that have demonstrated themselves historically to be oppressive, to create genocides, wars, and battles and strife. So I think new ideas tend to be, on the whole, as Steven Pinker is a big advocate of, he's fond of pointing out that we are actually, decade by decade, century by century, living in a new enlightenment, and we are becoming more civilized on the whole globally than we used to be. But that's only in tiny increments. The problem is regressions, and regressions can happen very often and very quickly. So, in that sense, I'm more afraid of arcane views and values that simply, I believe, have no place in modern life.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, why do we always go, we got to settle this problem with military? It's like
Right.
conflict
Exactly.
resolution can
Right.
be resolved many ways.
Yes.
You don't have to just pull up the military card for the immediate.
Right.
But that question came from two quotes I thought you'd get a kick out of. John Cage says, I can't understand why people are afraid of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones.
Yes.
But Charles Kettering, the guy who invented the intermittent windshield wiper, said, people are very open minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones.
Right. Right. Well, to me, a sort of ancillary quote is from, I think I'm quoting her correctly, Susan Sontag. When she was discussing art, she said, great art should have the capacity to make you nervous.
Oh, that's good.
And I totally agree with that. I think that is also in keeping with the critic Harold Bloom. Harold Bloom often says that a great work of art, in his case, particularly novels and poetry, will attack you with strangeness. That there's a strangeness to a very good poem and a very good novel. And I think that's Sontag's capacity to make you nervous. Again, that there's something that is a sort of creative disorientation. And I'm a big believer in creative disorientation.
Dude, you really helped me a lot. Creative disorientation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love Harold Bloom and I love Sontag. Beautiful. Louis Buñuel says, if I don't fuck your shit up, I'm fucking failing.
Yes,
He didn't say
exactly.
those words, but I morphed it in. Great art is two things. It fucks your shit up and it goes, I could do that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Like a guy went backstage at a Sun Ra concert and he said, my kid could play that. And he goes, Sun Ra goes, but can he transcribe it?
Touche.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I remember I was probably about 3 years old, and my parents went back to Poland to visit their relatives, and I remember falling off a horse.
Wow.
What that says about the rest of me, I don't know, but there must
Falling
be
off a
something
horse in Poland?
in Poland. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm half Polish and half Czech.
I wondered about that because I was wondering what fialka was, and I thought it was either Czech or possibly Finnish. But
Yeah, it's Czech for violet, the flower.
ah,
But I got this from Miroslav Vidus. He says, they call me Bounce because I'm one bad Czech. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
a blessing.
Tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
My father, though he had only a sixth grade Polish education and was very old when I was conceived, he was 66 years old when I was conceived. He was retired by the time I was a child of any kind of awareness. so he was home a lot, and he tinkered in the basement, and he would, in his crude, unrefined way, try to convey to me the importance of acquiring knowledge just for the sake of acquiring it. That it's a sort
Jesus.
of duty, a rightful duty for the human species to use its brain to its fullest capacity and to learn about the world. Um, and to neglect that is a shame and it's a dishonor. So, in his own indirect way, I felt this kind of respect for accomplished figures in the arts and the sciences, and I wanted to imitate them, emulate them. Um, Sadly, with science, though I'm a um, uh, peruser of science and I follow it and I read a lot of science books, I did not have the innate talent, particularly mathematically, to become a scientist. So, fortunately, I swerved into literature, where I was a little more, where I had a little more aptitude. So that was my father. Outside of that,
Oh, hold on, Martin. I got
yeah,
to tell you,
sure.
tinker in the basement it sounds like the Midwest uh, philosophy. I grew up in Michigan. It's like, yeah, let's go tinker in the basement. Here's my favorite. You take a mayo jar and you nail the top into the ceiling, and then you fill it with nails, and then you have the nails hanging from the ceiling in glass
Right.
jars. Like, that's called tinkering.
That is tinkering. Pure and simple.
Pure and simple, good old fashioned American Polish tinkering.
That's right. Great image.
Okay, outside the immediate family.
Outside, without question, it was my 10th and 11th grade high school English teacher, Bill Church. Um, he's the one who awakened me to the beauty and the power of true literature. Before that, I was pretty much a science fiction geek. Then one day in class, we had to pick a poet to do a report on, and he began describing this poet more or less like this. He said, "Well, for those of you who are interested in someone who's rather obscure and who a lot of people find obscure to read and is rather challenging and sometimes outright difficult, there's a poet called T.S. Eliot that some of you may want to pursue." So I went immediately to the high school library, got a copy of his poems, and was struck by the hollow men. Um, After that, that changed. That was a pivot point in my life. I wanted to discover all kinds of other literature and poetry, but The Wasteland, The Hollow Men, showed me what poetry could really do. That it's not simply the expression of sentiment in a saccharine manner. That it's actually a vehicle for conveying concepts of grandeur and moment and pith and power. Um, and in the same year, the other author who inspired me tremendously, because I'd never read anything like it before, was Henry Miller.
Yeah, that was amazing. We're going to get into poetry. I'll tell you one great Henry Miller story. You ever been up to Big Sur, the Henry Miller
Yes.
Library? You know the
Yep.
Henry Miller?
Once.
Yeah. So I think his name's Magnus runs it now. But the guy who ran it and started the Henry Miller Library was oh, you probably know his name. I forgot his name. He was like Henry's best friend. And they would get laid all the time because women read Henry Miller and they think he must be a sexy dude.
Right.
So
Right.
they were just like, so as soon as Henry died, the guy kept the Henry Miller house, and he goes, how am I going to keep getting laid? And he says, I know, I'll put up a sign, Henry Miller Library. And it worked for like 10 years. Then he died. Then Magnus took it over, and it's really a cool little library, bookstore, museum. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to stop there, but we had limited time, so we had to drive on past it. It was unfortunate. I really wanted to go there. Next time
Yeah.
I'm up there, I got to do it.
Yeah. Magnus is great. Okay, we're going to get into poetry, but a few more. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
My mother was incredibly Catholic, and my father was a hard-bitten atheist. So
Wow.
I lived in this dichotomy of perspective,
That's
and it
heavy.
was very confusing.
Do you pray?
Pardon me?
Do you pray?
Not anymore. I used to. I was the cliche good Catholic boy until about the age of 13, and I was one day reading a book about Einstein, and literally the whole idea of a supreme being just dropped out of my consciousness. It made no sense to me, and ever since then, I've never been able to get that back.
Okay, let's go back to that age for a second. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
I'd like him to be able to justify all the pain and suffering that have occurred ever since the beginning of mankind.
That's good. You'd put him on the spot.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, homie. No, you see, I like this. When I say, what do you want him to say, or what do you want God to say to you? You flipped it. You said, I want him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I want him to justify. That's not flipping it. Yeah. Okay. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I've been pondering that for years, and by coincidence, as part of my side reading, since it's Halloween time, I'm reading Stephen King's nonfiction book Danse Macabre, where he studies horror fiction and horror film in the United States, and of course he discusses the concept of evil because people are always curious why he is writing what he's writing.
Yeah.
He talks about inside and outside evil, and in that case, if you have something like Psycho from Alfred Hitchcock, you would call that inside evil. But the bigger question is, where does it actually come from? Stephen King doesn't talk about that. Your question is addressing that, and I really don't know. I would say, for practical purposes, evil men do exist. I think there are people who have so little conscious awareness of how other people feel. They have such utter lack of empathy, like Joseph Stalin, for instance, that I would label them for all practical purposes as intrinsically evil. Other people, I think it's context. I think they're in an environment that influences them in a way that they adopt and habituate themselves to a certain form of behavior that we then call evil, but they could have turned out a different way.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this light on. Hold on one second. And
Sure.
The next question concerns, Martin, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And a few modern thinkers, Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. It's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, I think it depends how we consider the term enemy. If you're looking at the world stage, if you're talking about a situation like our president versus Vladimir Putin, then you have no choice but to acknowledge them. So there's little choice there. You have to acknowledge because politics entails that mutual acknowledgement perpetually. If you're talking about a intimate situation, two guys in a bar, say, who have a riff about something, and then they seem to sour towards each other and potentially become dangerous to each other, then I'd say Alan Watts is right. I think if you disacknowledge the guy, you tend to take away some power from him, which is probably something that works, again, on an interpersonal level more so than it does on the political scale.
Yeah, and we're going to go into James Joyce for a second and take it into that Irish realm. In pubs, they go, is this a private fight or can anyone join in?
Right.
So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. About 100 years ago, he basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?
Right.
Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think because art crystallizes and condenses. I think in the 2-hour duration of a film, with the magical process of editing, you're able to compress reality into a space and time that you cannot do in real life. Also, you're able to pick and choose. You're able to select peak moments of peak experiences, so to speak, and present them. Whereas in real life, peak experiences come by every blue moon.
Yeah, it's good. So, walk us through just briefly, Martin. What'd you pursue in college? You find this great high school, or this great high school teacher turns you on to T.S. Eliot and Henry Miller, and you start pursuing literature. Then at what point do you go, oh, I can do that? Your tipping point where you started to write poetry. And then what did you pursue in college? Walk us through that.
Well, mine almost went the other way. I felt early on that I can do this, so to speak. But as I started to read more, my demands upon myself grew disproportionately high. And I came to a wall probably when I was about 26, 27, when I was trying to become a published active writer, where I realized that I could never write up to my satisfaction. And the role models, unfortunately, were absurdly high. There's an author, I don't know if you're familiar with him, named Thomas Pynchon.
Oh, yeah.
Who wrote famously Gravity's Rainbow, The Crying of Lot 49, fantastic. Pynchon is sort of my contemporary, I'd say, apotheosis of the novelist. I think I'm convinced that he's got more talent than any other living writer right now, period, hands down.
Yeah.
Close in approach is Don DeLillo,
Yeah.
but I think Pynchon has a ability to create idiosyncratic imagery, very fresh metaphors, very new syntactical tricks, though he doesn't use them a lot, that a lot of authors just can't do. Besides that, I mean, he's got an encyclopedic mind. So when I came across Gravity's Rainbow early on, that was my role model novel. I thought if I could write like that, that would be something. But unfortunately, that did not come to pass. Sorry about that.
That's Pynchon calling you up right now.
I know, probably.
Dude, I hear you on live TV. We're on live TV across the U.S., across the world.
Right.
And Pynchon picked up on that. I know he did.
Wherever he is, wherever he may be. He's
famous,
famous,
there's a great San Jose Mercury article that said that Pynchon is a handyman in Venice, California. Where
he'd be perfectly happy.
Oh yeah, he probably is, because that's where Same guy, Philip K. Dick, studied writing at the Venice Public Library.
Right, and Pynchon used to live on Manhattan Beach.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, for a while.
But
Yeah.
isn't Pynchon, DeLello, and Gaddis all Finnegan's Wake wannabes?
You know, I was wondering that. That's a very great question. I love that question, Jerry, because that's what I think of when I think of writers of that stature, like William Gaddis, Pynchon, DeLillo, to some respect, John Barth, when he wrote Giles Goat Boy and The Sotweed Factor, also a person who has tremendous virtuosity. Um, it could be that was an aspiration, but I think um, no one's come close really yet. I think what Joyce did so far is unique.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, yeah, I should admit that that's one of my weaknesses too. Is I'm a sucker for virtuosity. Whether it's someone who could juggle 11 objects, in the air. When I'm most attracted to those novelists and poets who have a verbal ability that is just incomparable. So
Yeah.
I'm dazzled by that. I know a lot of people find that a superficial trait and are not really interested in syntactical gymnastics, but for me, those kind of verbal pyrotechnics are part of the meat and potatoes of what I like in literature.
Now, how do my friend says the three T's of music tenets are theory, technique, and taste. So you could apply it to literature. Technique, these guys know how to put sentences together. It's like they asked Joyce once, "How's the weight coming along?" He goes, "Well, I've got 12 words in 1 week. You got 12 words." He goes,
Right,
"What's taking you so long?" He goes,
right,
"I'm trying to put them in the right order."
right. Yeah,
But okay, so that's technique. Theory is, well, I know grammar and rhetoric, and I know blah blah blah. Taste, how does one acquire taste, whether it's in music or literature? How did you acquire the taste for these guys?
well, in a way that some people disdain, which I didn't. I decided, let me think about it myself, form my own opinion. But then, in addition to it, since I acknowledge that there are people out there with taste themselves and ability to discriminate much better than I can, let me listen to other critics. So I began perusing critics until I kind of came to certain voices that I can't think of a better word for, Jerry, than the word trust. There's
Yeah.
just certain voices I trusted more than others. Again, Sontag, I trusted, George Steiner, Harold Bloom, um, and so I would use them as guides,
Yeah.
you know, to developing my own sense of discernment about what's good, bad, or indifferent. So a lot of my judgments are kind of borrowed, except I think that my particular fanaticism for Pynchon was cultivated on my own. I remember still the very moment I walked into that bookstore when I was 18 and I saw the copy of Gravity's Rainbow and I opened it up and I was immediately struck by that strangeness that Harold Bloom talks about and the nervousness that Sontag talks about. When I was reading the text, I thought, this is written by a very powerful mind with very peculiar talents that I don't normally see exhibited. So I guess it's a combination of finding out things on my own and also, of course, heeding the voices of people that I think are just good at it.
Yeah. No, dude, Bloom is amazing. What I like about Harold Bloom, you watch him on Charlie Rose or something, he knows how to drop quotes. Like I drop quotes all the time, but he knows how to do what McLuhan did. Is what does the quote? How can you reinvent
Right.
that aphorism? That's fine as its own, but how do you reinvent it, and how do you put it into the context of the discussion? Not like
Yes.
just you're a smarty pants who can drop cute
Right.
quotes.
Right.
You put them into context, because I find what you said was really important. That's how you develop taste.
Yeah.
What did you study in college? What was
Oh, English. I was an English major.
you're an English major.
Right.
And then, just to divert for a second, then at what point did you go into mental health services?
Just a few years ago.
Oh, so
It's very recent. Yeah.
for years you were an English professor? What did you do with?
No, no, I was not a professor. I only have a bachelor's. So I did a variety of odd jobs as I tried to become a published writer. And to my dismay, I finally reached a point where I felt I have the ability to appreciate, but
Right,
not to generate.
right.
So that's kind of where that went.
So let's go into the writing for a second and apply it to Joyce too. We're going to go into Joyce. Well, let's do the Joyce first. Where did you discover Joyce? Post pension? And what's your route? Because we met through Sweeney's Finnegan's Wake Reading Club.
Right.
Where did you start with Joyce? At what age? And how'd you get to the Wake?
I started with Joyce in high school with Dubliners, and he didn't leave a big impression on me at that time. Then I had, of course, heard about Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake from my teacher. I looked at Ulysses, flipped through it, and said, you know what? This is something that I'm going to want to read at some point. I don't know when I'm ready for it. Then, 15 years ago, a professor from Buff State, Lawrence Shine, at the campus house of the university on Monday nights, formed what was called the James Joyce Reading Circle, in which we read aloud from Ulysses, and then we would express our reactions and opinions, and he would then inform us about what he knew. And it was one of the most pleasurable experiences of my life, being in that reading circle. So
Yeah.
that reading circle really got me delving into Joyce deeply. I now have probably like 35, 40 books of criticism on Joyce that I have yet to plow the rest through.
Yeah. And so then the COVID hit and you found Sweeney's, or how did you delve into the Wake?
With Finnegan's Wake, it was also through the inspiration of Lawrence Shine. While we were doing Ulysses, the reading circle, year after year, I decided to try to tackle Finnegan's Wake on my own.
I see.
Yeah. And so it's been rough going. The first attempt, I remember I got to page 109. That was it.
But were you reading it out loud to yourself or quietly?
Both. I was actually doing both.
You were reading it out loud. Huh?
Yeah, there were some passages, sometimes paragraphs long, that I would read out loud. Then the rest I would just read silently to myself.
Yeah. This is a stupid question, but Martin, how much do you get the Wake percentage-wise from 0 to 100%? And how much does Joyce get the Wake, in your opinion, from 0 to 100%?
I think I get about 12% if I'm lucky. Okay.
And what do you think Joyce got?
I'd say 100%.
Wow. Okay.
I think because of the deliberateness with which he wrote, and he even said to his friend Frank Budgeon, I'm paraphrasing here, it's not an exact quote, but he basically said that, every word he set down in his books, he thought about their meanings, their associations, everything. That book was crafted with great deliberation and with a lot of authorial intent. So I think Joyce understood his work. This is not to say that other meanings cannot ramify out from what he put in. Of course they can.
Right.
But I'm a big believer in the intent of the author, which is, by the way, as a side note, why I was dismayed with a lot of French critical theory, because a lot of the French critical theorists presume that the world is a text and the human consciousness, you are nothing but a text. There's no I behind the writing. That's what Derrida believed. And I believe that's all nonsense. I believe that we are still creatures in a palpable way, in a visceral way. And when Jerry Fialka or Martin Penkala sit down to write something, there's definitely an I behind the creation of the words. I don't believe in this kind of disembodied voice that just generates itself out of socially created structures.
Perfect lead in, dude. You got ESP, Martin, because you screenwriting teacher told me great art. Wait, before I asked it, the cool thing is the way McLuhan got into the wake basically was when he studied new criticism at Cambridge with Levy's and I. Richards, and they basically said the last person you want to ask about their art is the artist.
Yeah, right.
They're the ones who got them started on the wake. So
Right.
it's sort of interesting
Right.
in that regard. And so Camille Paglia is the same way. She hates the French guy, the French
Yep.
theory. But
I'm a big fan of hers.
yeah, she's smart. She's a big fan of McLuhan too. So a screenwriting teacher told me great art, great film, great book is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. So, two questions. What role did intention play when you were writing poetry or when you were doing creative writing? What role did intention play? And then your guess, what role did intention play in Joyce's? Not what Joyce said, I want to confuse people for 30 years. You
Right.
more your hunch, your hidden, you know what you think his hidden hunch was.
I think intention plays a supreme role, particularly in my writing. Um, I was achingly conscious of every meaning I can think of when I wrote something down. And incidentally, there's a great observation by Kurt Vonnegut in his book Timequake, where he says there's two kinds of writers: swoopers and bashers. He said swoopers just start to write and write anything higgledy-piggledy, mishmashily, and then at the very end, when they're done, they go back and do a lot of correction and fixing and tweaking. Bashers write one sentence at a time, and they won't go on to the next sentence until that one sentence has been finished. And once they're done, they're done. So he said, it's interesting. He said, the vast majority of men are bashers, the vast majority of women are swoopers. And I'm definitely a basher. So as I craft one sentence at a time, there is total deliberation behind it. And I'm aware of what I'm trying to do and why I'm trying to do it. I think Joyce was the same way. Yeah. There are a lot of people who dislike Joyce for that reason. Now, Sontag said something, I think it was regarding Kafka, which I kind of disagree with, much as I tend to agree with most of what she says. But she said some of the greatest works of art seem to be secreted rather than constructed. Secreted rather than constructed. And I thought, well, with Joyce, you definitely have a constructor. He's an architect. He's a builder. He fashions his works of art. He doesn't secrete them. So I think that observation can go either way. I think there are great works of art that have been secreted, so to speak. But I think you could also create a great work of art the way Joyce did by building it piece by piece, unit by unit.
You really evoked studying the Watts Towers here in Los Angeles. Guy made a piece of art for 30 years and then said, I'm done, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And it truly is the greatest piece of art ever created on the face of the earth by one human. Yeah. And so in studying it, most people think it's called folk art or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, folk art, And then there's visionary art. Folk artist it sounds similar to swoopers. It's just the process of adding, and you keep going. and then you might fix it a little, but it's just this process. Bashers seem to be like visionary artists. Simon Rodillo had his vision of what the Watts Towers was. Then
Right.
it was a process of adding it for 30 years.
Yes.
Finnegan's Wake, Joyce had his vision, and then he just bashed away at it for 17 years.
Right.
So yeah, it is. There's fine lines in both because you want to be free. Like
Sure.
we're studying this McLuhan line today. The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
Ah,
It's a
like that.
little romantic sounding. One guy said, Duncan said, that sounds like an ad salesman. And so I Googled the line, and the first thing that came up was a Balinese ad agency using
it. Wow, irony of ironies.
Yes. But now Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much did you think of your reader when you were writing? In the same question of your thoughts on Joyce. How much?
I absolutely 100% thought about the audience. And again, to cite Vonnegut said that a lot of writers write for an audience of one, that they either deliberately or inadvertently have a certain person in mind, usually someone they know. In his case, Vonnegut said it was his sister. He realized after a while that he was writing all his novels for his sister. And when I write, I usually have a sort of made up audience of about half a dozen people or so that I consider having more or less the same interests as myself, and that becomes my token audience that I write for. But I think he's right. I don't know if art could be created in a vacuum like that. Perhaps it can. Perhaps there's I'm fond of using the word compulsion because I think for a lot of artists it is a compulsion that some people are going to create art no matter what. Literally, no matter what. Whether they're dying of cancer, whether they're starving, some people will do it. So that part is still a mystery to me.
But do you think Joyce was thinking of his readers, or they didn't play a role in that really?
That's what I'd like to know. In the critical books I've been reading about him, I've never gotten a grip on that question, Jerry. I don't know whether he had someone in mind or a group of someones in mind or not. Because particularly with Finnegan's Wake, you certainly would like to imagine who did he exactly think would be able to decipher this novel and savor it in a way that it should be.
The dude had major ESP or something because there's 52 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs across the world.
Yeah.
And no other book has, and people go, I'm in a reading club. They go, well, what books have you read? I go, one. They go, what do you mean? You're in a reading club and you've only read one book? When does it end? You go, it never ends.
Right, it never ends.
Do you got in your pile of books there John Bishop's Joyce book, Dark?
I do.
Well, you know his. I've interviewed him with all these same questions.
Wow, tremendous.
He taught a second class at Berkeley, and guess who it was on? Pynchon.
No way. That's great. That's great. It's tremendous.
So here's the other question that you've already tackled it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Two of my film heroes, George Manupelli said, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, a great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more? I know it's a stupid question. It means, and it's both, and it depends, but is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture, technologies, and environments are dominant?
I think it depends, Jerry, on the artist. I think some artists are more vehicles, and other artists are more, if you will, transmitters of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Well, can art making be egoless?
No.
Well, how do you react to this? Transmitter or vehicle? Okay, so 90% of people have answered, can art making be egoless? They'll go, no. Then a year ago, someone said, great art is egoless. And I went, whoa. And then a couple months ago, someone said, great art has, or not, no, not great. Art making has to be egoless. So how do you address that?
Well, in the smaller sense, I think there are artists who deliberately put less of themselves into their work, and others who put a lot of themselves into it. A good example, again, is both Pynchon and Nabokov. In Pynchon and Nabokov, you have two writers who I think try to distance themselves. I think Pynchon calls it forced dislocation of personality, where you're not trying to be autobiographical. Indeed, what stunned a lot of critics when they read Gravity's Rainbow was Pynchon was 8 years old when World War II was around. But there are passages in Gravity's Rainbow when people have been in the war, that by people who have been in World War II, who read it and said, this is as if it was written by a guy who was really there. It's that convincingly gritty and full of detail. So I think what Pynchon does, from what I gathered that some of his old roommates have said about him, is he would gather a whole bunch of source materials and synthesize all that information with his high IQ and be able to create a fictional world that has almost nothing of him in it, but has almost all his sources. So I think you can be more or less egoless, but I don't think you can be absolutely egoless in creating art.
That was good. So, what's the function of poetry?
Well, I think it has multiple functions. It's on its simplest level to delight you, to entertain you, and to distract you, if you will, as T.S. Eliot pointed out. But on a more profound level, um, yes, I think at minimal, it's a diversion, obviously, like so many things in life are. But at its highest, I think poetry is the most compressed form of artistic expression next to the visual arts. So in writing, it's tremendous, compact, and efficient form that makes poetry unique.
Dude, you are smart, Martin. You're really communicating well to me today, and I'm learning a lot. I appreciate it. In fact, you brought it's almost like Kenneth Rexroth said, the purpose of poetry is to woo your lover and subvert the bourgeois.
That's great.
I've been rewording Allen Ginsberg. I've seen the best minds of my generation waste their time on Finnegan's Wake. But
Yeah.
here's Leo Bersani. Maybe you even know him. He died about a year ago. Great lit crit. Or no, he died a couple months ago. He
Oh.
studied Mallarmé's symbolist, poet. I'm curious your thoughts on this. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Huh. I'd have to ponder that one, but on the surface of it, I'd say, yeah. I think that there is a pressure that's exerted on the poet by whatever crises may be occurring that generates some of the most um, lasting expressive forms in poetry.
Yeah, because it fits into this one too. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, you are what you hate.
Yeah.
In fact, Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve.
Right.
And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist."
That's right.
So what do you think, Martin, of this line? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Martin, but like one creates what one resists. What do you think of that line?
Yeah, I think there's an essential tension inside us. And when we do art, we're reacting against something that is, I mean, Bloom would call it the anxiety of influence,
Yeah.
but more broadly, there is a kind of set of, I'd say, antagonisms that we all have within us. And I think when art is generated by an artist, they're reacting to those antagonisms, whatever they may be in that particular person's case. Yeah, absolutely.
What's another word for antagonism? What does that mean?
Um, I'd say a sort of a uh, a threat or a sort of other, an anti self. You know, that we
Yeah.
do want to believe that we have a certain, say, moral direction in our life, but again, we're also fighting against the demons that pull us in the opposite direction.
Is that Jung's shadow when he calls it a
I
shadow?
think so. Yeah,
Yeah, that was good,
I
man.
think so.
I am learning so much. Okay, so that's back to T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
The language of the subconscious, I'd say.
Yeah. What was the motive of the cave artist?
I would love to know. That seriously, Jerry, I find myself just at random when I'm driving to work or having an ice cream cone. I'll be thinking about that very question. I would love to be able to go back in time and meet those guys or those guys and gals who drew in the caves of Lascaux and in Spain that drew those cave paintings. I'd love to know what was in their head. I mean, it seems to be two theories. One theory is that it was a sort of pre-religious religion, you know, that they were idolizing these animals out of fear. Um, the other theory is similar but a little different. The other theory that I've heard is that they were painting the animals in order to sort of cast a spell on them so they could be good in the hunt. So they could,
Yeah.
you know, let's paint a wildebeest. So the next time we go hunting wildebeest, we'll be able to capture
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both theories are plausible.
Yeah. Which is interesting is that the same thing why humans create art now?
Right. Right.
Same difference probably,
Right.
but I always say the reason they made art was a good excuse to have grapes and cheese and crackers and but the other one, one of my favorite answers was to keep people in the cave.
Ah,
Like, come on over to my cave. It's like, you know,
I like that. It's kind of like having wall-to-wall carpeting in your
yeah,
in your 1950s home when no one
right.
else around you does, right?
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
If you're an artist, conviction. If you're a politician, compromise.
Oh, that is smart. Wait. In your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
I would say ambition, then skill and luck comes last.
Yeah. The guy, I used to ask the question, is ambition based more on fear or joy? How would you answer that?
I would like to think joy, but it
Yeah.
could be fear. But I'd like to think joy.
Yeah. But so 90% of people would say fear. So then I read Friedkin, the guy who directed The Exorcist. He said, in Hollywood, It's all ambition. Skill and luck have nothing to do with it.
I disagree. My girlfriend actually was an actress in LA for 16 years, and she cited what I have always suspected. She said, "No, the element of luck is very real. Being in
Yes.
that old cliche of being in the right place at the
Oh,
right
yeah.
time is definitely real." So, and Jack Lemmon, I remember gave an anecdote where an actor friend was driving with Jack Lemmon past a small theater in off Broadway, New York, and there was the actor taking a smoke break. And Jack Lemmon's friend said to him, "See, Jack, see that guy over there? He has just as much talent as you, if not more, but he wasn't as fortunate as you to be where you are." So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think luck is definitely real.
It is. And
Yeah.
the golfer Gary Player said it best. He says, "The more you practice, the luckier you get."
Yeah. Yeah.
Is perception reality?
Partially. So I'm going to compromise with that one and say it's partially reality.
Why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless?
Because of the extreme angst and ennui and sense of doom and foreboding that would be created by entertaining that thought for more than a minute. I think people I think people are full of defensive rationalizations. I think we protect ourselves in very slick ways.
That's again McLuhan's great line. You mean my whole fallacy's wrong?
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. That like that
Woody
wonderful scene in Annie
Woody
Hall.
Allen. Yeah,
Yeah,
Annie Hall.
Woody Allen.
But you know that Woody made Marshall say it backwards.
Ah,
Marshall said it as a question.
as a question.
Woody made him say it as a statement.
Statement. Ah,
So it still illustrates another great McLuhan aphorism. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth.
yes.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast.
Breakfast.
Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
To my dismay, no. I wish I could. Really, Jerry. I mean, I wish I could get back in that wonderful childlike state of mind where I could entertain impossible things. I guess it's a sign of my age, where I've
Yeah.
become such a hard-bitten pragmatist that it's hard for me to do that anymore. It's too bad.
So, in your pursuit of, I think what you are is a pattern recognizer in the world of philosophy and literature. This is your thing is like studying these patterns
Yes.
in literature. And because you're doing the lit crit and you're really knee deep in the reading. You're not just one or the other. Tell me one major element of that pursuit since you started that's changed in one major element that stayed the same.
Huh. I'd say the major element that stayed the same is wanting to see multiple perspectives on a certain pattern, if you will.
Yeah.
The thing that's changed is I feel I've sort of drawn some conclusions. Whereas for decades, I felt I'm not going to draw any conclusions yet. It's too early for that. I want to sort of spread the wealth and get as much input as possible before I come to any convictions.
Very good, Martin. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Hmm. I think originally my original introversion. I was a quiet nerd introvert, and that led me into being a nerd that was interested in knowledge and knowledge acquisition and pattern recognition, like you said. So I think that's one instance of that.
Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you maintain focus.
Nice.
If you're angry and lose focus, you've lost everything.
Beautiful. I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can satire be destructive? He says, that's the job of satire. Now, if you draw a cartoon in a certain country and they kill you, some people think death is destructive. Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. What's the function of satire?
I think satire is the mirror that's meant to be held up to society.
Yeah.
Whether or not people see themselves and whether or not they recognize themselves in that mirror, is only something you can hope for. But certainly, I think its main purpose is to be that mirror. And when it's effective, I think it can change things. But for the most part, I tend to believe with a lot of authors that, as W.H. Auden said, poetry won't change the world. It's not going to change anything in that way. But what it does do is it changes the world locally. By that I mean it changes people's responses to the world in very tiny, small ways. And if those tiny ways accumulate and accumulate, you can get bigger changes.
Yeah, this is good because I want you to help me on this one. I took this Auden, I think it's a lit crit talking about Auden, and I've used it as a mantra for years. So I sort of made up an Auden quote.
Cool.
And, it might be different. And it's sort of like what you said. Auden's a great thinker. He said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. We want to think it activates us, but it might just be pacifying us and making us not be present. Like,
Right.
oh, I can go read a book and think. But here is this, I just found my notes where I got that, and I'm curious if I pushed it a little too far. And of all people, you could help me. We come to art like the sick looking for cure. But it is unclear if art offers a cure or a strong dose of anesthesia. That is the mystery of art. Now, I'm not quite sure if Auden said that or they sort of rephrased. But do you think it's okay if I say the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us? Or should I say offers a cure or a strong dose of anesthesia?
Yeah, and a matter of fact, Jerry, worded a little differently and more simple way for myself. That's been a question that's been on my mind for decades. Every time I read a book, I look at a painting, I ask myself, how much of this is altering me in a kind of benign, beneficial way? Whereas the alternative is it simply just diverting me? Is it just like an anesthesia? That's a very profound question to which I still have not come up with an answer.
Yeah. So you think activate and pacify is okay than saying offers a cure or a strong dose of anesthesia?
I think that they're virtually synonymous. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Look at this one. Can you go a little over? We got 12 more minutes. Can you go a little over? Or you got to
Sure.
go.
Sure.
Okay. This is McLuhan in 57. It's misleading to suppose there's any difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So usually when I tell people this, what teaches more effectively? What? No. What? Whatever pleases us, effective. Discuss that in terms of education and entertainment.
Well, I have a sort of divided opinion on that because, on the one hand, speaking for myself, my own experience, I tend to, of course, do better by something I'm pleased by. On the
Yeah.
other hand, I've been a kind of person who has also believed that, eat your oatmeal, it's good for you, put hair on your chest. And some of my programmatic reading through my life, much of it, has been stuff where I felt I'm probably not going to enjoy reading this book, but I feel it's going to be good for me to read it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a blend of both. I think initially it's nice if you could have the attraction of something that's pleasing that's going to then be pedagogic. But barring that, you can still learn when you're not enjoying.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all I have to do is think about something as simple as learning the multiplication table. That was just drilled into us. It certainly wasn't pleasurable, but it was effective, so it worked. Yeah.
Can you forget to die?
That would be lovely. No, no. And that brings to mind Woody Allen's famous quote when asked about would he like to be immortalized through his art. He said, "I don't want to become immortal through my art. I want to become immortal by not dying."
By not dying. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
I think there is a definite difference in. Um, I'm going to qualify it a bit here, Jerry. I'm going to say there is some difference in brain functioning.
Yeah.
Without getting into it in a
Yeah.
long-winded way, briefly, I think that men compartmentalize more. I think something in the structure of our brain physiologically forces us to compartmentalize our thoughts and our, I don't know about our feelings, but our thoughts anyway. And I think this is why you have the statistical um, phenomenon of there being both more idiots and more geniuses among men than women, at least by IQ test standards. You also have the phenomenon of women being just as good as, well, I should say, girls being just as good as boys at an early age in math, but then come the teenage years when brain functions start to compartmentalize, you get the phenomenon of the nerd, right? And the math nerd or the science nerd tends to be male more than female. So I'd say that there is a brain difference between men and women, but only it varies from individual to individual.
What caused matriarchy?
I think the acknowledgement that, I'm sure Camille Paglia would probably say that it was the fear, the male fear of the womb, and the simultaneous adoration of that process of generation, the womb and birth and so on, that made men feel that the female can be and should be the figurehead and leader of their tribe or their clan or whatever social group they happen to be in.
Well done, dude. That's people get stumped by that question. And you really brought up Robin Williams' womb service.
Yeah.
Or or the theory, and I'm not saying I agree or disagree, is the word mafia begins with the letters MA. That's
Yeah.
because women run the world, but they let men think they run the world.
That's right.
One of the women in the Finnegan's Wake Reading Club said, "Shh, don't tell people that."
Right. Right.
You started with the great line, peace of mind. How do you find peace of mind?
For myself, it's been a rough journey, I have to say. Um, Peace of mind is not easy to come by for me. I get glimpses of it and moments of experience of it, but to have a sort of Zen like trance state of serenity. That has yet to happen to me there, Jerry.
5 quick Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words.
Sure.
1, who started it all?
The first ape that took a bone, Kubrick fashion, and smashed it on the skull of another creature.
Woo! Stanley said, "Why'd you make 2001?" He said, "To convolate McLuhan."
Oh,
And then he invited McLuhan to one of the pre-release press screenings, and
no way.
Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes. Second Alan Watts question: are we going to make it?
I fear we are not. That's
Okay,
what I fear.
leave it there.
Yep.
Third, where do we put it?
Hopefully in the right place.
Beautiful. Who's cleaning it up?
Hopefully not the cockroaches, but probably the cockroaches.
You ever see Tim Carey smash the cockroach in Paths of Glory by
Yes.
Stanley Kubrick?
Yes.
He goes, "Tomorrow that cockroach will have more life than me," and Tim smashes and goes,
Yep.
"Now you got the edge on him."
Now you got the edge on him.
Wait, did I ask for who's cleaning it up?
The cockroaches.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yep.
Okay. Number 5. Is it serious?
Yes.
Wow. Okay, we're almost there. Couple more. Should toilet paper come off the roll over or under?
Under.
Why?
It's more aesthetically pleasing.
That is amazing. 90% of people say over.
Oh, yeah, my girlfriend does.
Yeah. And okay, that was good. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Salieri complex.
What's the first word mean?
Salieri was in that play and movie Amadeus. He was the musician that wanted to play God's music, and along comes Mozart and blows him out of the water. And so Salieri felt that nothing he could do could ever rival Mozart's accomplishment.
Wow. Okay. Now they want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Patchouli.
Dude, that's the root of this question. You know this? I mean,
No.
I started this question 25, 30 years ago because Madonna had her book glue scented with patchouli.
Is that right? I did
Yes.
not know that.
That is the root of that question.
Oh my God, I never knew that. That's something. That's a coinky dink.
Yeah, quinky dink. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Madagascar and made of titanium.
Beautiful. Martin, tell me something good you never had, but you never want.
Oh. Oh my God, that totally stumps me. Something good I've never had, but I never want. Oh, I guess a Manhattan penthouse apartment. Never had it, but never
That's
wanted
it.
it. There you go.
Good answer. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd vomit myself. Literally. Yeah.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I see a cultural shift of tolerance that inspires me. And I think what's been needed for millennia on this planet is more tolerance, plain and simple, in every manifestation you can think of, whether you're talking about religious, political, racial, sexual. I think tolerance is what we are going to have to develop if this planet is going to survive.
Really well put. So, Joseph Boy's great agitprop artist, he said, make the secrets productive. By the way, he wrote a whole new chapter to Finnegan's Wake. He was reading it and he says, I can do this. And he just wrote a chapter. Lou Welsh, a great beat poet and ad man, said, guard the secrets, constantly reveal them. But it was another great Wakean, Thornton Wilder, in 1928. He said, art is confession, art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time.
Very good. Yeah.
You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. Martin, what's it really all about for you?
Well, I think on the one hand, I think love is extremely real and important. And I think one of the beauties of love is a phenomenon that you can't do by yourself, by definition, and that is sharing the world with another.
Yeah.
I think that sharing that world vivifies it, makes it much more palpable, and you come away with a richer experience.
Yeah.
Um, the other part of what it's all about for me is simply making yourself a citizen of the world in terms of your interests and your pursuits. You know,
Yeah.
don't leave any stone unturned if you can.
Yeah. Really well put, Martin. Eden Abe, he hung out here in Venice and he wrote a song called Nature Boy. And it goes, the greatest lesson you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return.
Yeah.
And yeah, you really captured that in describing love and being a citizen of the world. And I'll ask this last question and then I'll tell you how you went full circle on this whole thing. Pretty amazing. What gives you the most optimism?
The human inclination to want to be good, to put it as simply as possible.
Yeah.
That when the dust settles, when all is said and done, I think people ascribe to some kind of definition of goodness,
Yeah.
whether that's spiritual or just merely ethical, is not really of my concern. But that is what gives me optimism about the human race. How far we can take that, that's another question.
Yeah. No, it's well put because the first question I got from someone who studied Wilhelm Reich, they said, what's the best thing for a human being? He says, other people.
Yeah.
And, you said beautifully, peace of mind.
Yeah.
It's really good. The last question, what gives you the most optimism? They asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he said, other people.
Right.
And so it is, full circle how we have to share love. It's not just having love, but sharing it.
Right. I've never really subscribed to. I know Jean-Paul Sartre, of course, famously said, "Hell is other people," but
Right.
I've always been suspicious of that, and I've never really taken it to heart. I think
Yeah.
in a very qualified, limited sense, hell can be other people.
Yeah.
But I think in the broader, more realistic, if you will, sense, no. Other people are all we have going for us, and we should be as kind and considerate as possible because we only have each other. And if,
Yeah.
if we lose that, we lose all grip on this world.
Well, what's the main thing you've learned by working in mental health services? Because that takes a lot of courage, a lot of patience. And is there anything that you can tell us about what you learned about life pursuing that?
One thing I've learned is how fragile we are.
Yeah.
When I see patients with mental illness, I see them as victims of their own physiology and how easily that can go awry. Um, there's been many people who've said this in different ways lately because I'm reading Stephen King. He said it too, that all of us are about, an inch away from madness. And I really believe that. I think it wouldn't take much to kind of push a so-called normal person over the edge into a psychosis. And so by looking at these people, I've just kind of reminded of the fragility of human life. And that just amplifies my conviction that we should be as good to each other as possible because we're not made of nuts and bolts. We are not steel statues. We're vulnerable. And
Yeah.
those vulnerabilities need to be acknowledged and supported.
Yeah. It's really well put. Yeah, McLuhan had a great line. He said, you can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital.
That's so true. That's true.
My friend said, yeah, I got him. I have him framed on my wall. See, I'm sane. There's proof. There's a great joke in the beginning of Dave Van Rock's book, too. The guy's in the army, and all he does is go around. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. And all his fellow army dudes go, "You're fucking nuts, dude. Go to the shrink." And the shrink analyzes him, and he says, "Okay, here's your discharge papers." And he goes, "That's it."
Wow.
So we should do a salon, or I'd like to invite you maybe on Pynchon or on Kurt Vonnegut sometime. Did you see the new Kurt Vonnegut doc?
No, not yet.
Oh, dude, go out of your way.
Okay.
The guy made all the docs on Woody Allen, Marx Brothers, Lenny Bruce. He's Bob White. He's like the guy who's made all these great docs. And for 40 years, he was shooting the Vonnegut doc.
No way.
And then he died, and he went, dang, it was
Oh no.
too close to him. So
Wow.
he sat on it for a few years, and he finally put it together. And it's quite an amazing portrait of Vonnegut. It's well worth
Good. I'll have to see
whatever
it. I gotta see it.
the $5 or $6 or go on Canopy or whatever.
Yeah. No, I
But
love him. And I actually had the fortune to meet him 4 separate times. I was teaching English at a private school in Manhattan on 50th Street. And I bumped into him at a cafe and he was eating a muffin. And I thought, okay, this is not going to go well because most celebrities just want you to leave them alone. But it's Kurt Vonnegut. I got to say something to him. I walk up to him and I introduce myself. And immediately, Jerry, he turned it around on me. Rather than me asking him questions, he started asking me questions. Oh, do you live here? Oh, do you work in this area? Oh, what kind of work do you do? And I thought, how very like a writer that is, that he's curious about other human beings. So yeah, splendid person Vonnegut is.
amazing. Yeah, definitely seek it out. And doing a salon on Pynchon is so needed. Yeah.
Yes, it really is. I would love to do that.
You know all you see in Infinite Jest, the movie?
The movie?
Yeah. Oh no, not Infinite Jest. What's it called?
Oh, Inherent Vice.
Inherent Vice. Did
Yeah, I own a copy. Oh yeah.
What'd you think of the movie?
Well, his books, he's one of those authors that are notoriously unfilmable
Yeah.
because of the kind of cartoonesque structure of his stories. So it's very difficult. Like, I could never imagine a movie made out of Gravity's Rainbow. Inherent Vice was a little more naturalistic, if you will, but it couldn't quite capture the zing and zap of Pynchon's prose. So I enjoyed the movie because I'm a Pynchon fan, is the best way I can put it.
Very well put. Yeah, I'm glad you're critical and told me the truth. Because have you ever seen Passages from Finnegan's Wake, the movie by Mary Ellen Bute?
No, I have not.
Dude, you got to see that. I mean, I'm not saying it's a great film. I'm just saying you got to see it. It's free on YouTube and it's a feature
Terrific.
film. The
Great.
woman invented electronic abstract animation.
Wow.
And then she made one feature film, Finnegan's Wake, and it's like, what?
Stunning. Wow.
I mean, it's worth checking out. I'm like,
Sure.
yeah. All right, Martin, thanks again. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and goes on forever and ever.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate it. It was wonderful to be here.
Really fun. Thanks.
All right.